Are you serious?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Karen, you notice he didn't look at me and say I didn't look like it.
No, I'd say Gary said he had his 70th birthday, and I said, "You don't look 70." He said, "Thank you." And I said, "You used to."
Hey,
So before we start, I just wanted to mention that we are here for this book.
no way.
But Mike, I am reading this.
Oh, cool.
Monster, because I'm taking the Defense of the Resurrection with Sean McDowell at Talbot right now.
He's fantastic.
So we're slogging through this.
Well, I think I'm going to join you guys. He usually brings me in for a conference call toward the end of the course. And
Yeah, I think in a few weeks. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think we can go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome to Girl Talk Apologetics. My name is Patty Trotty, and my two co-hosts are Ann Sands, wave Ann, and Susan Morales. And we are very excited to have as our guest tonight the authors of the book we just finished, which is The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Dr. Gary Habermas and Dr. Mike Licona. Dr. Habermas is Distinguished Research Professor and Chair in the Department of Philosophy and Theology at Liberty University, where he has taught for 30 years, or maybe more if that's not up to date. Is that accurate?
If I listen to Mike, it'll be about double that.
Okay.
It's actually it has been 40 years. Yeah, I just did a quick little bit of math. 40 years.
40. Okay.
Yep. I was really young when I started.
I guess you would have to have been. He has also penned more than 40 books and 100 articles and has given more than 1,500 lectures in universities, seminaries, and colleges all over the world. Dr. Mike Licona is Associate Professor of Theology at Houston Baptist University and President of Risen Jesus Incorporated. Dr. Licona has spoken on more than 100 university campuses and has appeared on dozens of radio and television programs. Gary Habermas claims that Mike's large book on the resurrection of Jesus, which Ann just showed us a minute ago, is currently the best ever written on the subject. Well, welcome, gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for some Q&A. I wanted to let you know that many of the ladies in our group are learning about apologetics for the very first time, and this will be their first experience hearing their questions answered directly by apologist authors who are professionals. And all of us appreciate your work and your willingness to be here tonight. And before we get started with questions from our readers, we'd like to hear from you two how you ended up working on this book together and how you came up with the minimal facts approach.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, even though I joke about Gary, the fact is I love him. And I'd kind of like to say a dad, but
like a grandfather.
But I mean, he's my best friend. And honestly, I don't know that I'd be a Christian today if not for him, because my last semester in grad school, I went through a period of some serious questions and doubts about the Christian faith. And it wasn't anything I'd actually learned. It was just kind of like, well, how do I know this? I believe I have this relationship with God, but don't people of other religious beliefs? I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses that come to my house, the Mormons, they believe they've got a relationship with God. I'm sure Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus, they all do as well. How do I know I'm right? And if I'm wrong, I could be in trouble. So I got referred to Gary, and I went in his office, and he so kindly spent time with me. And I mean, we're talking about the mid 1980s now. I think it was 1985. And after that, there was no internet. So I would call him, and he just so graciously gave of his time to me. And like I said, I don't think I'd be a Christian today if not for him. I owe him a lot. So after a while, I wanted to put together a book that would be friendly for lay folks and about the resurrection. And a lot of what's in there is stuff that I learned from him. So I said, look, I learned this stuff from our phone calls and reading your books and other readings you've given me. Let's co-author a book together, and you can help me with this. So that's how it came about. And so that came out in 2004. And I just want to see how many of you have played the video game in there. All right. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was fun.
Oh, good. You know,
It's
that
a little
was neat.
dated, but it's very hard. Like when I took it, I couldn't get past an 80% because of the open question ones.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
the first time I took it was hard.
Yeah, we had a company that donated over $250,000 of work to putting that game together for us. It was a defense contractor who actually created tank simulators for the government, and they put that together for us.
You definitely have good contacts. That's all I'm saying so far is what I'm hearing.
So I
Eric,
guess,
did you
Gary,
have-
you should talk about the minimal facts and how that came about.
Well, for me on the minimal facts, I also went through a very serious time of doubt, and it was those who know me would probably tell you I'm underestimating my time, but it was 10 straight years and another 10 at least interspersed years. I mean, it was 25 years is probably fair. And there's a story out there, because I've given my testimony a lot, that I considered, it was a lot more than considered becoming a Buddhist. I thought I was within a hair of it. And people think, oh, well, when you say that, you were probably 15 or 18, and you're saying I almost became a Buddhist. I will confess now, I haven't done this for years. I will confess that it was post PhD that I had those doubts. And I did my dissertation on the resurrection. I learned a lot about myself during that time. And I think Mike's hinting at a few things here behind the scenes, but I'll just tell you flat out, for me, I realized at that time what the difference was, because I was doing some study at that time on what became psychology, which is not a subject I like at all, but I needed it because so many people were coming to me and asking about doubts, and I was trying to help them, and I was in turmoil myself. I realized that a good deal of my doubt was emotional doubt and not factual doubt. And piling up 10 or 15 or 20 evidences was not going to stop an anxiety attack, or was not going to stop meaninglessness, or was not going to stop, wondering what's after death. And so what ifs can be very powerful in our life. And when someone says to me, after talking for a few hours, seriously, often 5 minutes, you can tell an emotional doubter. And when they start asking what if questions, I stop and I'll say, does it hurt? And they'll say, it hurts, it tears me up, it touches every morsel of my person. I'll say, that's called emotional doubt, because factual doubt doesn't hurt. And by the way, Mike is one of my best examples of somebody, when it started in that day, he said he came to my office, that he is my example. I use it without his name, of being a factual doubter. Because Mike walked in, we hardly knew each other. We passed each other in the hall, and we had a couple, super good friends in common. And Mike just said, hey, I got a question for you, blah, 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 blah. And I don't remember the question, Mike, maybe you do, but we sat and talked about it for 10 or 12 minutes. And Mike said, hey, thanks, appreciate it. Turned around just as quickly as he came in, and he was gone. Never saw him again. And so I use that as an example of factual doubt. Factual doubt doesn't hurt. And if it starts hurting, it's slipping over to the other category. Well, I didn't know that mine had slipped over. And there was nobody there to tell me I needed to control my emotions. C.S. Lewis has a lot of warnings about it, but I needed it. And once I found that out, I started unraveling what was going on in my life with the Buddhism. By the way, unraveling things the good way. I mean, taking care of the problem. I mean, not falling to pieces.
Not like a sweater.
Yeah. Not like an old something or other. I really realized I was playing tricks with myself when I started straightening out my thinking, and it all fell into line. I was an idiot, to be real frank with you. It was like all the reasons in the world are right here. Nothing can touch it. Nothing can test it, and no religion has anything like it. What's wrong with you? Well, what if? And this hurts, and I'm sorry. those aren't reasons. So.
Hmm. That's very good. Thanks for sharing that. And then how, when you two decided to write this book together, how did you come up with the concept of using minimal facts?
Well, you know, what I was going to say real fast was that back when I was going through these doubts, I still remember the chair I was sitting in. I still remember the year. You ready for this? I was pastoring when I was going through some of these. And I sat there in a chair and I was doing my graduate work. And I thought, the critics are going to doubt this, and this. And I still have the page of notes that I wrote that year. And I said to myself, I wrote on the paper, if these are the only facts I know, I can answer this question. And then I started saying to myself, this is cool. If these are the only facts I know, I can answer this question, and this question, and this question. And I started calling them the core facts. And people weren't sure what core was. They think I mean central, but you know, whatever. And then once or twice I used the word minimal, and I went back and saw that in my early books. I thought, that's the best word, minimal. If we use only the data that critics allow, we have enough to show the resurrection happened. So I taught it in class. And Mike, I suppose, Mike, that's maybe Mike, I never had Mike in class, but Mike did his, Mike, I was the director of your MA thesis, is that right?
That's correct.
So
I was in New Testament where you were in philosophy.
Yeah, and Mike's being very humble. Tell them a couple of your reading courses at in New Testament. What you were taking. I tell people this too. The courses with Ron Sauer toward the end, the private courses.
Oh yeah, my interest was not so much in theology, but just exegeting scripture and understanding what it meant. And so I wanted to be able to learn to read the New Testament in Greek, its original language. So I took the equivalent of 5 years of graduate level Greek. And so, yeah, I was taking things like rapid Greek reading and Septuagint Greek and all kinds of stuff. So I loved it.
Meant. Yeah, I had a minor in Greek in college, but when I hear I had 16 hours, that was enough. But when I hear somebody having rapid reading of the Greek New Testament, it's like, thank you. I'll just keep reading my liberal stuff on the resurrection. you tell me what the words mean.
All right. Well, are you two ready for some questions from our readers?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, Susan, I think you have the first one.
So out of curiosity, with Easter around the corner, I wanted to ask both of you that when you celebrate Easter, how does being an expert on the resurrection affect your spiritual experience on that day in particular?
You want to go, Mike?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that being an expert on the topic impacts my day more. I do know that I'd like to be speaking in a church on Easter, and if I'm not, I'm kind of discouraged. It's like that's what I need to be doing on Easter of all times of the year. So, yeah, but I mean, Easter's been it's very meaningful to me. The resurrection took on a whole new, how can I say it? Just a different kind of meaning to me several years ago. My mom died in 2013. My dad died in 2014. And I mean, I was especially close to my mom, and it was, it was rough, but it wasn't nearly as rough as it could have been because I had the assurance I'm going to see them again. And so, yeah, I miss them, but it's like, I miss them. I didn't hurt for them. I hurt for me because it was a loss. In contrast, 2 years ago, our family, my wife, my 2 kids, and myself, the kids don't live here now, but we had to put down our family dog. And I mean, Gary knows what Nessie was like and stuff. And it's a little West Highland Terrier. And it's just devastating to us. I mean, my wife has probably seen me cry just a handful of times over our 30 some years of marriage. And she'll tell you that I cried more over the loss of that dog than I did with both my parents combined. And it's not that I love the dog more. I certainly didn't. It's, I mean, I held the dog when the vet came up, and, you know, everybody in the room is just bawling and I'm crying, and I'm holding the dog, and the vet puts the medicine in it. And then a minute later, you know, she's gone. And I'm thinking, I was holding this dog that I loved, and just a minute ago it was alive. And now I may never see her again. I am not promised that I'm going to have that dog in heaven. I'm not promised that that dog is going to live for eternity. And just that thought was just devastating to me. But it's not when our loved ones, who we love so much more, when they die, and knowing Christ, because we're going to see them again. And that takes so much of the pain away. So like Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4, we do not grieve as those who have no hope. And so that's what the resurrection, in addition to giving me confidence of having eternal life and knowing God, it comforts me in the death of loved ones. And honestly, I look forward to death. I don't look forward to the process, but, you know, I'm looking forward to death.
Gary, did you want to add anything to that from your side?
I'm not trying to, I think what Mike said is just the difference between hope and no hope. That's one of my favorite verses in Paul, along with several others, where he says in Philippians 1 that he prefers to die and be with Christ, 1:23, because being with Christ is better by far. And Mike, you're the man for this, but I understand in the Greek there that it's an emphatic better by far, and occasionally translations will translate it as I prefer to die and be with Christ, which is better, comma, far better, period, to put this extra emphasis on it. And in 1995, probably 10 years, 15 years after my serious doubt ended, my wife got ill, and she was my best friend, closest person in the universe, mother of our 4 children. She was only 43 years old, and she was diagnosed with stomach cancer. I didn't know much about stomach cancer in those days, but I found out real quickly that nobody survives. In fact, the oncologist walked in the room right after the surgery. She was right there in the bed, but she was still under the anesthesia, and she was out. And the oncologist said, "This is arguably the worst cancer you can have, the worst kind." And I was heartbroken. And 4 months later, my wife died in the summer of 1995. And I had make-believe, which I published these, but I had make-believe conversations with God. I mean, they were real conversations in my thoughts, but it was make-believe that God was answering me. And I was on the front porch of our home, and it was the first week in May, and we just got back from the hospital. By the way, she was in the hospital over Easter. That was very significant to me. They sent us home. She was upstairs. I had a baby monitor. The kids were in school. I had a baby monitor in the front porch with me. And every time she as much as turned over, I stopped everything I was doing and ran upstairs to the next floor, and she was just laying there sleeping. She was fine. She was sleeping 18 hours a day. And I had make-believe conversation with the Lord. And my first question was, why does this happen to somebody who's tried to serve you, who with the stay-at-home wife, and you wanted me to teach, and now all of a sudden I wake up with a new job every day. I forgot I've got clothes to wash. I've got breakfast, lunch, dinner. I've got, oh no, there's homework. Oh, there's putting people to bed. And 4 months later, she died. And she was only 43. And back to what Mike said, verses like Philippians 1:23 and 1 Thessalonians 4 were what buoyed me. And the fact that the resurrection was real told me I have another hope to see her again. And not a hope so or a what if, but a no so and something that's in reality, because as Paul says, Jesus is the first fruits and others come after. So, I mean, we went straight to the existential deal here, and usually people save that for the end, and that's fine. But maybe it's a good way to start, because that's the difference between being grounded in the resurrection and not being grounded in the resurrection.
It's true. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay, Anne, you want to go to the next couple?
Melanie S., who we can only see her name tonight, but she has a family member who's hostile to Christianity and recently shot down Josephus as an unreliable historical source for Jesus, noting reasons it sounded like common literary devices used for dramatic effect. How do you and scholars in your field understand the usefulness of the information Josephus provides on Jesus?
Let me make one quick comment and punt over to Mike, because Mike's done I'm sure Mike's done more than this than I have. But all I will say is, in keeping with the minimal facts, where the first greatest rule is don't use anything that doesn't have multiple evidences. And the second rule, it just happens to be that since there's multiple evidences, critics agree. If you go to the most critical scholars, the requirement is that they be a scholar, not somebody going off and calling themselves a scholar, but with credentials. Not only do I not care if they're atheists or agnostics or skeptics, I prefer them to be. Many times they're more honest. And you think of people like John Dominic Crossan, Marcus, when he was living, Marcus Borg, Bart Ehrman, they all say Josephus is among the very best sources for Jesus. Go ahead, Mike. I'm just going to say, if the skeptics, I'm not giving an answer from authority, but if the strongest skeptics say he's a good historian, I'm interested in what are the reasons he's a good historian. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, Josephus mentions Jesus on two occasions. One is a disputed text in his Antiquities of the Jews, Book 18, Section 63. And there he mentions that he was a worker of astonishing deeds, that he gained followers from the Jews and Gentiles alike, that at the instigation of the Jewish leaders, Josephus's Pilate crucified him. And if you look at our text, in Josephus' text, it will say, but those who were his disciples did not abandon him. They reported that he appeared alive to them. Or no, it says, for he appeared alive to them 3 days later. And thus the tribe of Christians remained to this very day. Well, Origen in the early 3rd century said that Josephus was not a Christian. And so therefore, Josephus would not have said that Jesus rose from the dead. So what are we to make of this? So scholars debate over whether Josephus actually said this part, and they debate on if he said it, what part he said. Almost all Josephus specialists agree that sometime in the 2nd or 3rd century, a Christian came in and doctored the text, altered the text to make it sound a little better than what Josephus had actually written. Now, in the year 2000, I contacted, the guy's now dead, but his name's Louis Feldman, and he was the foremost Josephus scholar in the world at that time. And he had written a book back in the late 1980s, I believe it was. He wrote a book, Josephus Scholarship, something like 1939 to 1986. And he had done all these bean counting and so forth, and where Josephus scholarship stood during that period. And so I told him, I said, you wrote on how many, the number of Josephus scholars who think Josephus actually mentioned Jesus in that text. And I said, but where are you now in the year 2000? And he said, well, he hadn't really updated his bean counting. But he said, I would suspect that the ratio of Josephus scholars who believed Josephus mentions Jesus, opposed to those who say Josephus did not mention Jesus, would be probably 3-1. And he said, I wouldn't be surprised if it was as high as 5-1. So that's the disputed text. And you can see that the majority of Josephus scholars do believe that Josephus mentions Jesus there. So now the question is, well, how much did he mention? And so Feldman said that he went with John Meyer's reconstruction, which just leaves out the part of resurrection. It just says that after, Pilate crucified him, his disciples didn't abandon him, but the tribe of Christians remain to this very day. Now, there are a few scholars out there who would say that Josephus also mentioned the resurrection, but he didn't mention in terms of saying Jesus rose from the dead, but that the disciples reported that he was alive 3 days later. And that makes more sense to me too, that would have happened, just because Josephus was born in Jerusalem 4 to 7 years after Jesus was executed. He was the son of a popular priest in Jerusalem named Matthias. So this locates Josephus geographically and chronologically in the very spot where we know Jesus' disciples were proclaiming the gospel, including his resurrection. So Josephus would have certainly known about the apostolic proclamation of the resurrection. And that would have provided a reason for why the tribe of Christians remain to this day, because they believe Jesus had been raised from the dead. But we can't establish that. So we just don't know whether Josephus actually mentions Jesus's resurrection, or that the disciples claim that he rose from the dead. We just have to leave a question mark there. The only other thing, and I'll say this very quickly, the only other reference is in Book 20, Section 200, where Josephus mentions the stoning of James, the brother of Jesus, who was called Messiah. And that is rarely disputed by Josephus specialists. So I guess Melanie S., the person with whom you're talking just hasn't been reading scholarship on the topic.
Awesome, thank you. This question is for Dr. Habermas. You mentioned, this is actually my question. You mentioned that Antony Flew was very taken with near-death experiences as evidence for life after death. Why do NDEs point to an afterlife, and what bearing does that have on the case for the resurrection?
Yeah, when Tony said that, we became very good friends. He was the foremost atheistic philosopher in the world. There were 4 big ones, all British, and the previous 3 had died. And Tony was alone of the 4. Interestingly enough, the one just before, well, close to him was A.J. Ayer. I don't mean close like friends, but close in time. A.J. Ayer had a near-death experience before he died. And he wrote an article as an atheist. He wrote an article entitled, What I Saw When I Was Dead. The title was always amusing to me because somebody else could have planted a title on it. We know these things happen, but what I saw when I was dead, not near dead, dead. And what I saw, not what I think I saw, and the fact that atheists shouldn't be seeing anything. So, and then he says he was in front of this being who basically was God. Long story. Well, Tony and I started talking one night after dinner. He was at our house for extended 2 weeks, not at our house, but at campus, after we debated. And we were having dinner. And after dinner, I got out a tape recorder because we were doing a book together on the debate, and I wanted to recount some things. So we were talking about NDEs, and he knew it was being taped. I have it on tape. And I gave him some evidential cases for people who had no apparent heart and brain waves. This is way back when we had our first dialogue, 85. And I gave him some evidential cases, people without apparent brain or heart, and they saw things and gave testimonies of various sorts, sometimes miles away. And he said to me, I've written a book on parapsychology. It was one of the first books he ever wrote as a young philosopher. And he said, this is the best evidence, natural evidence for an afterlife I've ever heard. Later, when he became a theist, I wrote the article for Philosophia Christi journal, and the name of the title of the article was "My Pilgrimage from Atheism to Theism," and it's in there. I repeat the words from the taped conversation about NDEs. NDEs have gotten significantly stronger. There are now dozens of cases published of people who have had cardiac arrest with ventricular fibrillation. It's a specific species of cardiac arrest. And I asked a physician friend of mine today, how long do you think after when the heart stops, according to machines, how long does it take the brain to stop? He says, only a couple of minutes. And I kind of chuckled. We're good friends. I kind of chuckled. I said, according to the reports, the brain dies in 9 to 21 seconds. Now, I don't mean dies and can't come back. I mean it flatlines at 9 to 21 seconds. So if you have a near-death experience at, let's say, 30 seconds, or as one of the most evidential ones, at 30 minutes after, and some longer, a lot of scholars now are saying you're dead for those 30 minutes. Now, we can bring you back by CPR, but you're not near dead. You're dead when heart and brain aren't working. Anyway, there's a lot of evidential cases, and I think it helps the case for the resurrection. You can either start with NDEs and go to the resurrection, or go to the resurrection and end with NDEs. It depends on who's doing what. If someone says, well, that's a real nice story on the resurrection. Thank you very much, Dr. O'Connor, or Dr. Habermas. Thank you. But I mean, after all, you're asking us to believe in Oz or Middle Earth or Narnia, and we don't know any of those things from science. Science says when the brain dies and blah, 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 blah. What do you think about that? Well, what do you think about near-death experiences? That after the heart and brain are, this opens it up to another world. Well, people have dreams, as one guy said recently. People have dreams. It could be, and I go, hey, you're not listening. Evidence 2 miles away. While the machines, the condition says the heart and the brain are not working. And well, some people do that. Okay, great. In the latest book, 9 to 20 million Americans have reported having NDEs. That doesn't mean they all went anyway. Doesn't mean they didn't have hallucinations. Doesn't mean they're not lying. But after up to 20 million of these things, maybe somebody went to Oz. Maybe somebody went to Middle Earth. Just maybe. And you have to be open, especially when there's data from, I mean, if I told you the data, you folks, if you've never heard this stuff, there's nothing like it anywhere in religious research. And once you break that, there's no afterlife. Science says you can't live after the brain. Everybody's thinking now. And then I say, if there is an afterlife, can I talk about the potential event, the resurrection? That's an actual event in that time zone that science says has been opened up. So I think NDEs can work before or after against that. See, anymore, naturalistic theories against the resurrection are basically passé. The best known critics will not sit on a single theory. They either will not answer, or they'll say, oh, any of them are good. Any of them are good, according to David Hume, because David Hume says these things can't happen. Any of them are better than resurrection. And I'll say, why? Because there's no afterlife. Time out. You ever heard about NDEs? So if the number one objection is anything's better than that, I'll say that's nothing but a presupposition. You're using your presupposition on me. And if your presupposition is not evidenced, you cannot bring a presuppositional non-evidential thesis against my evidential thesis. And if the guy's real cocky, I'll say, and your cockiness is not an argument. Give me an argument for this thing. So if you've, and the crowd knows what you're saying when you do this. So if you've opened up another world and someone says they've been to Narnia, you at least have to look at something where there's good evidence that somebody was actually there and returned. If you look at the NDE cases seriously, why not look at Jesus' resurrection? So I think opening up the other world nullifies the number one comeback to the resurrection.
I think I'd always sort of thought of them as just sort of anecdotal. I didn't realize there was good research or evidence.
Right. Well, there are, believe me, there are. I'm doing a second major article for Major Technical Book. There are over 300 evidential cases now. Over 300. And if I told you I'm just telling you, you've heard of intelligent design and how things all line up, and you've heard of fine tuning and how things all line up. NDEs belong right there next to them. With not, if not, I would think the evidence is better than it is for intelligent design or fine tuning. And you put those three together, and then you put an argument for God's existence in there. And if you get God and you get fine tuning and design, and you get afterlife, and you throw in there a huge topic today, my colleague, who is now Mike's colleague at Houston, David Baggett, and Jerry Wall, another good friend at Mike's school, they've just done a history of the moral argument for God, and they think it's the best argument for God. If you line up God, order in the world, afterlife, and ethics, because that's what the moral argument is about, you've got a fantastic moral background from which to introduce the Christianity as the religion which best says it's the revelatory God side of this natural law, which is talked about, frankly, in Romans 1 and Romans 2, Psalm 19, and many other passages.
See, and you could have had both of them as professors had you just chosen the #1 school on apologetics, Houston Baptist University, instead of Biola.
Biola.
I'm going to Talbot right now.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is that the reason for that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was just, you brought up Antony Flew a lot. I have another question about him later on, but it's just.
But yeah, I was a visiting professor at Talbot for 15 years until, now I tease him, until Sean came, Sean McDowell, and they had to fill out his schedule. So they gave him my resurrection class.
That's what I'm taking, right?
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I just forever thought that they had just, cut him a piece of my pie. No, we are very, very, all of us, Mike, we're very, very good friends, but it's something to tease Sean with that I never forget.
Yep.
All right, our next question is for either of you, from Cynthia. And this is with respect to the paper written by the physicists Dyson, Kleben, and Susskind entitled Disturbing Implications of a Cosmological Constant, which is referenced on page 177 in the book. As Christians, we assume that what is meant by disturbing is that the specified complexity points to God. Considering that they, meaning the physicists, deny the possibility of a creator, have they ever clarified what they mean by disturbing?
Well, I've read that article. It's a great article, and you're right. That's what disturbing means. But in there, they say that basically the cosmology, the science and physics right now behind our universe seems to point to some kind of an intelligent agent outside of the universe that at a specific time introduced inconceivable conditions so that life could appear. And so rather than even considering that as a possibility, those three authors, astrophysicists, cosmologists, not cosmetologists, cosmologists, they just say, we just must understand physics incorrectly. We're going to have to start over. As far as I know, I mean, it's not my field. So I read the article. I haven't followed up on it because physics isn't my field.
All right, the next question could be, I guess, for both of you. This is from Donna, and she wants to know, is scripture memory important to you personally? And do you consider it important in your apologetics work?
I'll just answer real quickly. Back in the days when my wife was ill and my world was turned upside down, now I'm remarried. I just want to make that plain. I'm not like abandoned in the universe here. Got a great wife. Interestingly enough, Mike can tell you the story if you push him. The woman I married, we had been friends, her family and my family, her son and my son, for 15 years. And she lived around the corner from me. Well, Debbie, Mike's wife, lived with her. during Debbie's days at Liberty, Mike came to Eileen, my wife's house, because he was getting papers typed for some of our professors in our fields, and he wanted to date Debbie too. And we all hitched up. That's how we started our time together, the weeks together every year. But during that time, I realized Eileen and I got married a year after my wife's death because, like I said, we knew each other very well for 15 years. And I started memorizing scripture. And I memorized a fair amount of it. And when tough times came, I'm telling you what, I unpacked it for me, let alone unpacking it for somebody else. And it was great, great relief. Now, as time goes on, you've kind of caught me here. As time goes on, because of the condition of the world, I dare say, my time of meditation, which came after scripture reading at night, I would read scripture and then spend a fair amount of time in meditation. It's kind of morphed into scripture followed by an extended time of prayer. And I've been bothering myself lately, reminding myself that there were verses out there that I memorized that were a great help to me, and I needed to get back to them to learn them. So I'm trying right now to push myself back to those verses that I learned and used back starting the days when my wife died. And I'm totally committed. Mike's done more memorized than I have. Mike, I keep putting him on the spot. Mike, tell him what you did with the book of Ephesians, how you did your devotions for 1 year. If you forget the story, I'll tell it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Where you read, didn't you read the book of Ephesians like once a day for 30 days and you read it in Greek? Something like that?
Oh, well, yeah, I did that with Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians.
Oh, well, far be it for me to talk about memorizing a few verses.
But now,
Go ahead,
but I didn't memorize Ephesians.
No,
So
but you read it in Greek.
yeah. Well, I mean, now I read the New Testament in Greek now. It's just wonderful to be able to do that. But so when I was in college, I was at a chapel once, and a guy was talking about how he studied the Bible, and he said he took a small letter in the New Testament and he read it, the whole thing, every day for a month. And he said that sometime during the third week, you'd see things jump off the page at you. Not literally, but it was like the meanings would jump off at you. And it's like, wow, you'd never seen that before. So I just said, well, I'll try it. I don't have a really good method of Bible study. I'll try it. So I took the letter of James, and it was right sometime around the middle of the third week. Verses that, I just kind of glossed over before. It's like, wow, they just jumped off the page at me with new meanings. And it's like, well, that's cool. So I ended up doing that for a few other letters. And then I thought, well, you know what? I've never really memorized scripture. I mean, I had to take one course at Liberty where I memorized, I don't know, maybe 100 verses during the course, all on evangelism. And I thought, okay, but let me just try to do this. And should I be bold enough to try to memorize an entire letter of Paul's? And so one summer I decided I'd do that. And I spent, I don't know, about an hour or so a day. And after a couple months, I had Colossians memorized. It's like, well, that's kind of neat. I think it took me like 2 months. And then I got back to school, and it was like my senior year, and I said, well, I'm going to try Philippians. It's a little longer. It was like 100 or maybe 96 or 106 verses, something like that. And I did it in 2 weeks. And it's like, wow, you just try to memorize, and it helps you. You can do it a lot faster the more you try it. And so let's see, I did Philippians, Colossians, Titus, and I started to do First Peter, but I never finished it. And it came in handy later on. I remember one of my courses in grad school, I had this one professor in my class on Acts, and he's Korean, and he said, during the Korean War, our pastor got put in prison in North Korea, and our deaconess went and visited him in prison. He said, please pray for me. The conditions are horrible. And she said, Pastor, we won't pray that you get out of here. We will pray that God take you through your circumstances. And then the professor said to the class, well, what do you think about that? And I said, I think it's unbiblical what you just said. And he just looked at it. I said, well, what? And all of a sudden, Philippians chapter 1, verse 18 came to mind. Paul said, for I know that I will be delivered through your prayers and the provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. So Paul knew that they were praying for his deliverance from prison, and he knew that as a result, he would be released. That's the only course in grad school I got a C for. I ended up doing that twice. So then after that, I didn't memorize any, and it's like more than 30 years passed. And I just felt guilty about not memorizing scripture. Well, I'd had this interest in the Sermon on the Mount. And so I just decided, well, I'm going to memorize the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And so I spent 30 to 45 minutes a day. It took me 5.5 months. I would do it. My wife would go to bed. I'd stay up and I'd just memorize. I'd work at memorizing it. 30 to 45 minutes a day, 5.5 months, probably 5-6 days a week. And it was life-changing. It's life-changing. I just saw, I mean, this is a magnificent sermon, and there's, different scriptures in it that I just didn't grasp the meaning of it. But after memorizing it, you can see how Matthew has taken these verses. Most scholars think that Matthew takes what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount and combines it with what Jesus said elsewhere and weaves it together into a single sermon. And just to see what Matthew does, how he did it, adds meaning, helps clarify what Jesus meant by these things. Almost all the teachings are connected in some way to the others. It's really neat. And I've been to Israel twice, and in both occasions, they took us to a spot where they suspect Jesus may have preached the Sermon on the Mount, and I was asked to recite it from memory at those spots. And so that was really, really cool. So, I mean, if you're interested in seeing it, you can go to my YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, Mike Licona, and then type in sermon, and that will come up. It's 16 minutes long. So it's pretty neat. So that's what memorization has meant to me.
I was just impressed that you guys are able to refer to things off the top of your head. Like, I'm kind of like, I know somebody said something about something or other in such and such. At least Google helps me with that,
Well, and don't feel bad, because, I mean, honestly, this is what Gary and I do for a living. We are living in the text every day, all day. It's our passion. So, I mean, we should be really familiar with this stuff. If you're just not spending so much time in it, you're just not going to be as familiar with it. It doesn't make us any better people for it. It just means, I mean, this is what we do for a living. So don't feel bad. Badly. for Patty and I, who are grammar Nazis. Badly. I have a question about the hallucination or delusion hypothesis. How would you respond to people who say that group sightings of the Virgin Mary would counter that groups can't have the same?
There are a lot of assumptions in the way you asked that question.
Okay, break it down.
You said hallucination or delusion.
Okay.
When we do that book that you're talking about, The Case of the Resurrection of Jesus, we differentiate between hallucination, illusion, and delusion. Hallucination is the most radical of the three concepts. A delusion is when you see a grizzly bear while you're hunting and think it's Bigfoot. You've really seen something, but you've misapplied the data. A delusion is something you get locked up in a home for, or hospital, because you have mental issues. An hallucination is, in a way, is the most radical, because it's seeing something for which there is no external correspondent. I mean, at least the guy saw a grizzly bear when he thinks he saw Bigfoot. An hallucination is radical. Right in the middle of talking, I turn sideways and I start talking about my deceased grandmother being right here talking to me, and some of you start dialing 911 in Lynchburg and wonder what's going on. An hallucination is a very radical concept. And Mike and I have even talked to medical doctors who cross the line and miss it up. We'll say, yeah, that's not an hallucination. That sounds like an hallucination. It sounds like an illusion. Mike did that once with this very famous psychiatrist who wrote maybe the definitive book on hallucination, and he ended up agreeing with Mike. Groups do not see hallucinations. Now, back to Mary. Oh, one comment. I have co-authored with two different guys, one a clinical psychologist, one a medical doctor who works with this stuff. And they both did check the literature for, I think, 25 years. And there's not a single verified group hallucination in either the psychological, psychiatric, or medical literature. Not a single case. That doesn't mean there's none. That just means there's apparently no verified cases. Now, back to the Virgin Mary. What is going on with the Virgin Mary? The Virgin Mary, to do it very quickly, and there's a lot of these, more than the few we hear about, like Lourdes, Medjugorje, Fatima. Medjugorje may be the best known because it's in our lifetimes, and the kids are still around who are now middle-aged adults, and thousands of people have gone there. Let me just say that the apparitions of Mary are exactly the opposite of the appearances of Jesus. It's like an inverse relation, and I'll tell you why. Even very well-known skeptics who truly are scholars will say, well, then what did 10,000 people see at one time at Medjugorje in the mountainside? That dwarfs the 500 passage in the famous creed of 1 Corinthians 15. Well, let's talk about that. What did the 10,000, 5,000, 2,000, what did those people see on the mountainside outside Medjugorje? The answer is nothing. What do you mean? They claim the sun was dancing, and they claim they saw things in the sky. Okay, very interesting. Nobody in Medjugorje saw those things. And now there's a disease, I understand, with ophthalmologists. There's a disease named after this for people who stare at the sun and then see images. Now, I don't mean images of Mary. They were saying the sun was jumping and there were signs in the heavens. But here's the incredible thing. Mary's supposed to be there talking to children, and the crowd doesn't see Mary. They see the sun moving. And when you start talking to the kids who did the interviews, there are times when not all the kids saw Mary, and they're standing right there. They're right there with her in a group. Okay, now let's apply that to the Gospels. What would happen if it said Jesus appeared to the disciples and 3 out of 12 saw him, or 7 out of 12 saw him, or 10 out of 12 saw him, and 2 did not? Whoa. And then there are a bunch of people around him, like the 5,000, feeding the 5,000, similar event, and they didn't see anything. All they saw was people talking to the air, like me, disciples talking to the air, like me talking to my deceased grandmother here on my left. It's just not the same thing. And I'll sum it up with this. As far as we know, everybody in the resurrection appearances that were there saw Jesus. With the Marian apparitions, 99.9995 of the people do not see Mary. It's exactly the opposite. So how can they even be compared? I'll just say one last thing. I know this will rub some people the wrong way, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. I'd be better off if I teach at Houston Baptist because they tolerate this stuff more. No, I'm just kidding. You can tell there's a lot of teasing between us, but I say this at Liberty all the time. Isn't it interesting that the cases we use are always Marian apparitions? I believe they're highly problematic, but let's just say they're real. Why do they keep using Christian cases? At least, Mike and I both have a mutual friend. I won't use his name, but if I used it, most of you know who he is. Very well-known apologist. His uncle, if I remember the story, I don't want to kill this story, but I think his uncle, a devout Catholic, made 18 trips to Medjugorje. He brought our mutual friend along. And I think our friend brought another friend. And they went out there and they went on the hillside when this was happening, and they looked and looked and looked. saw nothing, nothing. And then I asked the apologist, what did your uncle say? He's very devout. This is like his 18th trip. Has he ever seen anything? And I believe he said, I'd have to go back and get the story, but I believe he said, my uncle has never seen anything, but he's been there with the crowd. And it's a very touching, emotional, like Mike on this possible Sermon on the Mount, you know, it's a very touching time for him. He's a devout Catholic. Okay. Well, like I said, I might rub some people the wrong way, but I don't think God judges us by what sign is over our university or what sign is over our church. I think God judges us by where our heart is. And I think it's very, very, very interesting. I don't take an apologetic stand for the Marian apparitions. I want to be clear about that. But isn't it kind of cute that they use Christian illustrations to try to disprove Christianity, and there's nothing like it other places? I just think that that's a little oddity there. Like, you might want to add something, I don't know, but on the apparitions alone, it is the opposite of the appearances of Jesus.
The only thing I'd add to that would, and just something small, is someone that Gary also knows, Ken Samples. He's an apologist, and he has written on the Marian apparitions.
Yep.
And he's gone over to Medjugorje, Croatia, and met with one of the seers, who's, of course, as Gary said, is now an adult, and was there. He said, you know, do you guys still see visions of Mary? Yes, we do. And while he was there, that seer, which was a guy, had a vision of Mary, an apparition of Mary. But like Gary said, he didn't see it. Nobody else who was around saw it, just the seer said it. So then after that person had the apparition experience of Mary, Ken asked him, has Mary ever spoken to you? And he said, yeah, once. What did she tell you? She told me to read a book. What was the title of the book? So he told him, and he wrote it down. He went and he looked the book up, and it was a book on the occult. So that would seem to suggest that that at least the Marian apparition this guy was experiencing was demonic in nature. I'm not saying they all are. I'm not Catholic, but hey, you know, if they saw Mary, I might become Catholic. You know, that's not so bad. It's, you know, but yeah, that's all I have to add.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to ask both of you if you could just tell us real briefly what you're currently working on that we might be able to look forward to reading in the future.
I'm working on everything and nothing. I am working. It's no secret. It's pretty well publicized, and it's all over. The word is all over the place. You'll probably hear rumors. I'm doing a magnum opus on the resurrection of Jesus. I've written, I don't know, 40 something books, and exactly like half of them are on the resurrection. Now that's because I have debates and there's hardly any overlap, but they're different aspects. Death and dying, we already talked about that. This magnum opus does not repeat any of that stuff. So far, I've only used the equivalent of about 100 pages out of 21 books. The magnum opus is now 5,200 pages long on the resurrection.
You need an editor.
Pardon?
You need an editor.
Boy, do I. I need somebody, Mike, to come over, move in with me for about a year. Or I'll come down to your place, Mike, and move in with you for a year. And I know you got a spare bedroom. I need to do something where I take a year, because I just don't get to it. I'm doing too many other things. I've had, I don't know, 35 invitations to do interviews in just the last 2 months. I get over at one a day, and I want to minister. I want to help people. Then people are calling about doubts. I've sent out 75 emails in 3 days. I'm a 2-finger typer. So yeah, I need help. Please pray for me. I've got these pages, but they badly need organizing, editing, and frankly, here's my prayer. I don't care if a big company picks it up or not. It's going to be very expensive. I don't care if I end up putting it out in ebooks. I don't care. I just want to get it into people's hands so it's on their shelves, so they have the material, encyclopedic like. And if something ever happens in this world where the persecution spreads around the world or other things go on, I want these books to be around so people have answers. I just want to get them out. For 2 cents, I would put them out like they are now, which is unedited, because they would look sloppy, but you'd get the point, you know, with 4,200 sources in them and footnotes in German and French. I would like to just say I'm done with it. I'm going to send you a stick, and all my unedited work is on that stick. Please take it and start thinking about a different topic for a book. That's where I am. So it's everything and nothing in the same sentence. That's where I am.
I appreciate your heart in that. How about you, Mike?
Well, since I finished my work on the resurrection back in 2010, I mean, I've continued to go on and debate on it, but I've kind of moved, and Gary had said how perhaps the number one objection to the resurrection long-term has been gospel differences. And I know a lot of Christians struggle over gospel differences, discrepancies, contradictions, whatever you want to call them. So I have spent, first of all, I spent 8 years working on gospel differences and came out with a book in 2017, an academic book, Why Are There Differences in the Gospels? And so for the last year, though, I've been working on taking that and making it less technical. And I'm designing it to be used by small groups. And fortunate, excuse me. I'm sorry. Here comes another. All right. See, writing a book is nothing to sneeze at. But there's a group that I'm working with, a group of 8 men. I meet with them every morning, Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. But I have to get up a little after 4 to get there. And so, Susan, that's why it was a little difficult to schedule me for this. And I'm meeting with them for 3 months, and we've got 2 weeks left in this. And I'm going through this 10-week study with them, where I'm taking this book I'm writing and I'm giving them a chapter a week, and this on gospel differences. And so this this is a lot more fun than the academic one, because I've taken some of the objections that I've received over the last 4 years, and I'm addressing them, but addressing them in a way that I'm just anticipating them and answering them before they can be asked in this new one. And then applying this to things such as, well, how does this fit into the divine inspiration and inerrancy of Scripture? And I mean, it's been fun, and these men are just eating it up. They're loving it. But what's cool is I'm getting this feedback from them, and as I'm designing each week's lesson, I'm creating PowerPoint slides, and I've got nearly 600 slides that I've created since January, since a little before January, for this stuff. But as I create these slides and the progress of how I'm going to outline this, I start to recognize that the way I have the chapter written just isn't as clear and flow as smoothly as I'd like it to. So I rewrite that part of the chapter and change things around. So this has been a very positive experience. So once I've done that, I'll go back to my other research on historical reliability of the Gospels, which deals with the question, what does it we actually mean when we say historically reliable? And how do the Gospels relate with other ancient biographies? And how does that relate with modern biography? And how do we talk about historical reliability of the Gospels in view of those things? So those are the things I'm working on right now.
Well, thanks. And we really appreciate so much, especially after just hearing how busy you both are, that you took the time to be with us tonight and answer some questions. I also, before we sign off, I want to say happy birthday to Taylor. Tonight's her birthday. She's been on a journey with us from the beginning. But
Happy
anyway.
birthday, Taylor.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Special day.
I just want to say thanks for inviting us. And this is so cool to talk to you ladies tonight. So Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, and the neatest thing, Patty, is I really like starting first. Mike and I have been doing some co-interviews recently, and it's fun to be on with Mike. It's a lot of fun to tag team. Sometimes we occasionally get a skeptic or two. That's really fun because we can kind of, Mike's a former or present mixed martial artist. He loves that stuff, and tag teaming on the resurrection is just really cool. And but what's special about tonight, what I was going to say was starting with the applicability of the resurrection was a neat way to start. Like, what difference does it make in my life? Now can change your life. How do you know it's true? It's pretty cool to do it the other way around. So I really enjoyed it tonight.
Good. Glad to hear it. Well, thank you all so much. Ladies, watch for the video recording to be posted on social media, and also watch for announcements for our next book after it gets chosen, and our reading schedule and things like that. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
God bless you.
Night.
All.
Mike, I have a quick question. Did you ever go on Lee Strobel's short-lived Faith Under Fire show?
I did, and had a little debate with Shabir Ali on whether Jesus was divine or prophet.
I was the producer of that episode. I
Oh.
was thinking that was.
Well, I've got problems with you then, Ann, because you edited out my final comment, which I thought was the highlight of the whole thing, and you cut
Well,
it
I
out.
wasn't the editor. I just produced it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool.
Susan, were you there? I had a segment too. I also had a debate with a mythicist, a guy who said never lived. And you know what? I don't know if this is kosher or not, but we got permission to put that segment on my website. And I'm pretty sure it's on
Oh,
my
yeah.
website.
Yeah, no, I did all the apologetics episodes with Lee. So
Yeah, we pushed and pushed and pushed, and nobody would give us the information or the permission. And we finally got it from the producer or whatever, and we put it on the website. So I have to go back and look and see if it's even still there.
And I just remembered I did another one with him too, with Elaine Pagels at Princeton on the Gospel of Thomas.
oh, that might have been the second season because that wasn't me. But yeah, that would have been very interesting.
Yeah,
She's
they didn't want me for the second season. They just wanted Mike.
and that was the era, I believe it was right around when the Da Vinci Code came
Yeah.
out. So she was hot, right?
Oh, Elaine was.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of hot is relative, but I mean,
Right, I know what you're
she was
saying.
being spoken of in these circles, right?
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I was thinking, Mike Licona, like I remember that name. All right.
But it's okay. You didn't leave out my conclusion. Whoever did it.
Oh,
Mine
good.
mine was all in there, so I was very happy.
Well, good.
Good. You're
Well,
all
if you ever watched Greg Kokel's one with Deepak Chopra, he just
Yeah.
wiped the floor with him, unfortunately. The poor man did
Yeah,
not
Greg-
really
Greg's
have
good.
a debate skill. So
See,
But also
back
helps to have logic on your side.
yes, it does. It really does.
Yeah. And,
But
and-
I'm
and
sure-
folks, that just goes back to the comment we made at the beginning. Christianity has all the guns. Christianity has all the data. And when other people are not producing data and they can just produce feelings and emotions and testimonies, I mean, that doesn't cut it. So when we have all the data at our fingertips, that's it.
Well, we're supposed to go now, but this is one last question. I was literally putting together over the weekend questions for you guys, pulling together other people's questions. And I'm the only Christian in my family. I'm the eldest of 6 kids. I was raised an atheist. And so I have 5 siblings and all, their extended families. And I'm the, lone Christian. And I'm thinking this book is really excellent for skeptics who are doing the research. And it's excellent for Christians who are maybe doubting essentials of the faith. But for my atheist family who is not even interested in religion at all, it's like the closest thing I can think is someone comes to me and says, I've got evidence for the deity of Mickey Mouse. I'm like, not really interested in going down that road and sitting and hearing it, frankly, because it's all so ludicrous. And that's the way they listen. So would you kind of recommend starting with evidence for the resurrection with someone like that? Or
And I'll tell you what I would do. Mike would do something totally different. We each have developed a lot of tools over the years. You already asked the question. I would start with near-death experiences. They're neutral. Everybody wants. I have some quotes and actual live tapes from some of the best known skeptics in the universe. They are not Christians. Albert Ellis, the number one atheist psychologist in the world. Bart Ehrman, in his book on death and dying. These people say things like, sure, I would like to live forever. I mean, if you have something to say, I want to hear it. Now, Bart just recently said, I don't like hell. He said, I don't think it measures up ethically, but I would like to hear there's a good heaven for everybody, even though I don't believe in it right now. Okay, everybody has that. Ecclesiastes said God has put eternity in our hearts. I would start with NDEs, evidential ones. If you email me, I will send you a list of about 20 heavy NDE accounts and evidences if you email me. If you just open their thought to maybe there's an afterlife, and after they've digested that for a while, say, can we talk about the resurrection? Because it's the same genre. It's life after death. And if there is, why would you ignore Jesus's, when there's this kind of evidence and you already have the door open to the afterlife? Now you have to be careful. Don't let them go to the occult with this like some people do. It's not in near-death experiences cannot tell you which religion is true or false. Because it's like talking to your neighbor who's a Muslim or your neighbor who's a Buddhist, or they're testimonies. When they say they're up in heaven, there's no evidence for that. But all the evidence is this worldly, things they see on earth while they don't have a brain or heart. People are interested, it opens a door, and now you can say, hey, can we talk about the resurrection? And if there's an afterlife, see, deity of Mickey Mouse isn't on the page with this one. You know what I mean? It's scientific data. That's what I would do. Mike, I don't know what you'd suggest, but I'd open the door that way.
Everyone's kind of unique, and just try to feel it for where they're coming from. I like what Gary just said, though. That makes sense. Just keep in mind that a person who's convinced against their will is of the same opinion still, right? So if they don't care, if they don't want to know the truth, it doesn't matter what you tell them. So I would say in a case like that, try the NDEs thing. And I mean, if they're not even open to stuff, then I wouldn't waste your time with it. Just love them and be there for them. And when they have a crisis in life, maybe they'll come to you and say, tell me about your beliefs and how God has helped you. And, maybe the timing will be different.
well, thank you.
All right.
Happy birthday again, Taylor. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.
Thank you.